Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Chow.
And I'm Trist Curless.
And welcome to the Musician's Loop.
Loop, like a drum loop?
No, like the kind of thing that a jeweler uses to evaluate gems.
Oh, like a magnifying glass, like what we'll do on this podcast, actively listening to music like a musician.
That's right. And every week, we are choosing a track to dive into together and share our thoughts about what we find intriguing about the song.
Whether it's songwriting, chord progression, instrumentation, recording technology, arrangement, whatever, we're looking at the music we love through the lens, or the loop, of decades in the music industry.
Hey, Trist. So tell us about this week's track.
Well, Elaine, what if I told you that in 2014, a band released an album on Spotify and made $20,000 in royalties?
Oh, that is really hard to do. I mean, especially on Spotify. Tell me more about it, how they did this.
What if I told you that that album had no music on it?
What?
Not
Okay.
only no music, it had no sound. It was all silence.
Okay. So what did they end up doing?
So our group today is the wonderful Vulfpeck.
Ooh.
Challenging the system, they noticed kind of a little glitch in the matrix, as it were, and they released a 10-track album on Spotify called Sleepify. And each song had a playing time, and it ran, and it had no music on it, just to show the fallacies and the falsehoods and the poor setup of the system. And so, of course, it changed right after that, like any good prank. But they sold this album on Spotify to have a free tour. So they set up, I think, a date. I think there maybe had 5 or 6 dates, and admission was free. They used the royalty money to have free concerts. How about that?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, like, thinking about this as a software professional, I mean, it is definitely someone who gamed the system, and I've gotta think through this a little bit more, but just thinking about $20,000 on Spotify, that is a whole lot of playing in Spotify.
Indeed, indeed. Well, that was well before the song we are featuring this week. I chose Half of the Way because, frankly, it's just a great hook. I love it.
All right. Well, with that, we are going to go ahead and put the links in the show notes. But before we go to our break, Tris, can you tell us a little bit about how we should be listening to this song?
Well, as we've covered here before, most of you could be listening on a jog or in your car. We're glad you're listening to us wherever or however you're listening to us. I just like to insert here, if you have a choice to improve your sonic listening experience at this moment, please do so when you listen to this song, whether it's how you stream it or if you own this and want to listen to it again. I like that we both maybe can bring you songs that you've not heard or just remind you of songs that you have heard and you can re-listen. So just want you to listen to it in the best environment. Grab those nicer headphones or put it on the nice system at the house or in your car. Again, if you have the choice, just listen to it in the best environment possible.
Awesome. Okay, with that, we're going to take a really brief break. So pause the stream, go listen to the song, maybe listen to it a couple of times, and we'll see you on the other side. Wow, that is the most pop sound I've heard out of Vulfpeck. And granted, I haven't heard all of their discography, but it was such a pop song to me. And I think it was very surprising to me because I expected something different out of this Vulfpeck thing. Like, tell me why you chose this particular.
That is exactly why I chose this one from them. It's kind of an earworm for me. It sticks in my head every time I hear it. First time I heard it, I just loved it. Very hooky. I think they're missing the boat. They should have created an entire 80s sitcom for that to be the theme, is what I think. I think it sounds like a sitcom theme to me. I don't know why. It's just very catchy, very hooky, super musical, well constructed. Yeah, I just like it.
It's funny that you mentioned 80s because I wrote down in my notes kind of like 1960s retro with some pop funk in it. That was my gut in there. But I really like what you said about, the hook and how it sounds like it lands really well, because that's exactly what I wrote down. I wrote that, in each one of these phrases, whether it's the end of the chorus or the end of each verse, it just lands very strongly on the one, which I think is a very pop thing to do, right? Where it's just like, oh yeah, it has a very good sense of closure. You could almost just stop the track anytime after it lands very
Mm.
solidly on the one.
Yep.
And it just, gave such a finality to each one of the verses in the chorus.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also was really surprised, 'cause I went through and listened a number of different times. One of the ways that I listened to it was for structure, so I think this was maybe my 3rd or 4th time through, because I was really curious about whether it mapped to a typical pop song structure.
Mhm.
It just sounded like that, but at the same time, there were elements that were very surprising to me that were not in the typical pop, I'd say, like, in the pop structure. But it did have a very consistent pop structure where you had this intro that was also the outro. You had a couple of verses, a chorus, a verse, a chorus, and then you had this bridge, an interlude. Now, where things broke for me a little bit was that after the interlude, there was the second half of the final line of the verse
Mhm.
before it went into the chorus a couple of times, then tagged its way out a couple of times.
Right.
But for me, just looking at the structure written out, it is a very classic pop song structure. Is that what you were hearing as a part of that, or were you
Yeah, no,
looking at
I
it
like
really
that.
differently?
I like that exact thing you're talking about. They put that little interlude in before you just hit the second half of a verse instead of an entire other verse there. It's just like the second half of it with the little interlude after the bridge. So I dug how different that is.
Yeah, I was also really struck by their bridge itself because it was so different than the rest of the song.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's to me, that's what a good bridge does. Heard a rallying cry lately of songwriting, like, "Bring back the bridge in pop music." Um, That's always where the cool stuff happens. Usually the cool chords happen. A lot of times thematically, that's kind of where the stuff goes down, or either a decision is made in the story, or consequences are had, etc. The bridge is like such a super powerful thing, and it just gives us a minute away from the catchy hooky thing
Mhm.
before we have it again. So it serves a lot, and it's true a lot of times today in pop music, they're just not there, or it's someone might call it something a bridge, but it's really like just a couple of measures of a couple of chords, and then right back to the hook.
And like a more of an interlude as opposed to a true bridge. Yeah, I
Right.
wrote down something very similar. I wrote down that the bridge generally has a moment of truth. Like if
Mhm.
you listen to the lyrics, that's really where, the songwriter is illuminating something about the theme that they're writing about, or like telling a part of the story, the internal monologue, or like what's going on behind it or what's driving it.
Right.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
that I wrote that down, and I love that you brought up just how important that bridge was.
Yeah, I like that. It's like comparing in this relationship, it can't just be half the way, right? So then they bring out these other things. You can't be only half of the way on these other things. You can't hold half of a hand. You don't break half the rules. Like once you break rules, etc. So I like the little parallels to that. There's just like, here's the deal, you're in or you're out. That stuff happens in the bridge. So I dig that.
Yeah, I actually had to look up the lyrics because I'm really bad at listening to lyrics or
Mhm.
listening to all of the other different things. So I looked up the lyrics and stared at them as if I were teaching literature or looking at it just from a songwriter's perspective. And I do want to read out the bridge to illustrate exactly what you were talking about. You can say that it's only a game. I don't mind playing the fool, but nobody wants to hold half the hand and nobody breaks half the rules.
Yeah.
And it is such a tight group of four in that it references a game, and then like at the very end is talking about rules, and there's this whole concept of half a hand. But the one thing that sticks out that isn't related to the game is playing the fool, like that phrase, playing the fool. I was thinking about this group of four and the instrumentation of the bridge because it pulls way, way back
Mhm.
in this instrumentation. Can you tell me a little bit more about, how instrumentation is used in a lot of different types of songs, like whether it's a bridge or whatever to illustrate a point?
Oh, well, right there, again, I think you focus the rhythmic emphasis that happens in the verses, bump, 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 that kind of groove that happens. We
Mhm.
go away from that. Da-ga-da-da. There's just these long things, which
Yeah. That
again,
more legato, uh-huh.
right, which fits with what you're talking about, more contemplating, like, "Hey, here's a deal, nobody holds half of a hand, nobody breaks half the rules. Like, here's the thing I want you to pay attention to." Again, it emphasizes lyrically what we were talking about and thematically the fact that, hey, this is the point that I'm making. It just brings more attention to what the lyric is right there by breaking it out of the rhythm and making sure that you're paying attention because we're just holding out the instruments, not getting in the way of what the lyric is there.
Yeah. I was looking at how I'd written out the structure, and right after the bridge is the interlude that we were talking about. It has a
Mhm,
whole bunch of chromatics in there, but I also wrote down interlude with octaves,
mhm,
because there are a number of different instruments who are playing the exact same riff.
mhm,
I don't know whether this is intentional at all. Like, knowing what I know about Vulfpeck, it probably was intentional, but, the entire song is about a relationship where you're not really in unity, right? Someone's holding back.
mhm.
But in the section where we have this interlude with octaves, there is literally unity,
Mm.
right? Like, this entire really complex riff is
Yeah,
happening, multiple instruments playing exactly the same note in different octaves, of course. But there's a sense of unity in that interlude that doesn't exist elsewhere in the song.
yeah,
What I just think that that's really,
that's cool.
yeah.
I like it. I like that.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how you see the orchestration of this particular song, like, over the course of the entire song from beginning to end?
The orchestration, I mean, they don't generally have too much extra stuff. Everything has such intention. The drum grooves, the bass lines, there's no frivolous instruments. There's tambourine when it needs to be. It needs to be the simplest rhythm it ever needs to be to outline sections. The use of the saxophone, you know, in places that it only needs to really be. They're just very intentional about that. I like in that interlude you talked about, there's like this synth sound that only happens there. And again, it's in tandem with these other octave lines. And on the bridge, suddenly there's this saxophone, which is also kind of a smoother sound. It adds to the smoothness of the bridge vibe we were already talking about. So I just like that throughout that uh, just all those little just the way that that stays is just solid, just very typical rhythm section, just tightness.
Yeah, I wrote down that the drums are subtly complex. One of my listen through was specifically listening to what the drums were doing. As someone who was a beatboxer for years, drums are kind of my jam. So I'm listening to, oh, how complex are these drums? It turns out for a lot of it, it's not super complicated. It's holding the beat and holding like a very simple rhythm. And then every once in a while, throw something just really interesting in there. I also love what you were talking about the sound, because I wasn't necessarily listening to some of the other pieces, but I listened to the keyboard a lot, and it was like, "Oh, that's a very classic kind of, 70s." I'm not exactly sure if it was a Rhodes, but it has a very classic sound to it, and I know that I have some friends who will be able to listen to that and say exactly which keyboard that was. I'm not that good at that. But I think that's what really led to my understanding of, retro. There's a sense of like, funk and soul, this very classic sound that we associate with that era that came through the instruments that they chose and the effects that they put on those instruments.
Indeed. Yeah, they use a variety of keyboards. They often use a Rhodes. I know there's a regular just piano on that Larry Goldings is a great piano player and composer. I think was a co-composer of the song is on this track with them. It makes sense to me. So musical. We'll have some things in this show, notes that I would love to add, talking about Larry Goldings and just the variety of places that he shows up in pop and jazz and humorous settings.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading Phoebus. I have like one final observation. I got this link from you as a YouTube link, and it was the music video of this
Mhm.
song. I found it incredibly distracting. I actually had to like move the tab into the background and listen to it multiple times before I could watch it. But then I found myself really looking at the people playing the instruments and seeing, and I know it's probably mimed, I know, it's not a live take, but it was interesting looking at them playing the instruments as an indication for what I should be hearing.
Mhm.
I'm kind of curious about what you saw in the music video that might have influenced your perspective on what you thought the orchestration was.
Yeah, I guess I probably should have just shared a non-video version to you first. That's how I heard it first
Right.
without a video. Um, I think the video reflects what they do. That's a very common thing for them. They don't really have like big creative storytelling thematic videos. It's literally them in their rehearsal slash studio space. It may or may not have been, they may not have been the recording, but it probably isn't terribly different from the way things were recorded, the way that they do stuff. It's very much old school. Their origin story is a little bit wanting to be like the rhythm sections of old that would just get called in and do these great 60s, 70s records where there would just be a rhythm section there, just churning through tunes every day, making album after album. So that's kind of the way that they're set up and they want to. So the video just to me just reminds me that that's kind of the thing they're going for is that it's not a big layered, overwhelmingly overproduced product. They want it to be a tight kind of in studio type recording.
And I know you've seen them in person, right? You've seen them live.
Mhm. Indeed.
Is it a very similar kind of vibe?
Yeah, it really is. And the thing about them in concert is just how many of them play different instruments. Theo Katzman, who's just a really cool songwriter himself and the lead vocal on this. At any given time, he's playing guitar while singing a lead. He's maybe not singing lead at all. Sometimes he's just at the drums. He's over at some keys. They're so good at the different instruments that it's not like part of a shtick, but it feels like it almost like, it would be easy to think of it as your shtick, but they're all so good at the instruments that
Yeah.
it's like, "No, that's I like his playing on this song," etcetera. But they just rotate around the stage at any given time, and it's has so much fun, and it never feels like, "Oh, when that guy's on the drums, it doesn't feel as good," or, "When that guy's
Mhm.
singing lead, it's not as cool." It's never that, it's always Vulfpeck.
Yeah, I love that, and part of it is that I am a multi-instrumentalist, and I also know a lot of people who play multiple instruments at very high level. At the same time, I know a lot of people who are specialists in their one instrument, and they're also amazing. I think it's just fascinating to see people who are at high levels with all sorts of different instruments just actually playing those instruments. So it sounds like it's a really special time, and I'll have to I'll have to make sure that I watch them.
Yep.
Make some time to watch them the next time they're in town.
Highly recommend it. But that's another thing is they kind of work in scarcity. All of them have their own different projects. Almost everybody involved has their own things or they're part of other groups, etc. Any given year they might only do 5 or 6 concerts, but those concerts are Madison Square Garden
Mhm.
and the Gorge or somewhere like that, or Red Rocks or at the Greek, etc. So it's not like they put together a big multi-city tour. It's like, no, we're just going to play big, awesome, fun venues we like to play. So that gives everybody a chance to do their own thing
Mhm.
while they can still, I think they're one of the first bands to sell at Madison Square Garden without a record label outside of themselves,
Mhm.
and they're self-managed. That's kind of indicative of the way that the entertainment world is going now. The fact that you could sell out these places
Mhm.
without those elements is kind of the thing. So definitely seeing them live is something I highly recommend if you don't know about them and check out more of their albums.
Hmm. Well, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
That's it. That was
Awesome.
it. That was my final thought.
Well, this is a really great transition into this next segment, which is our mailbag.
Mailbag.
That's amazing. This particular post that I found on Threads, it actually relates to what you were just talking about. You didn't even know about it. So this came from a Threads post in August of 2025 from Brandy Zadan, sorry, who's a rock and roll musician and 2 times Juno nominated. So she wrote, "The fact that the music industry currently qualifies you by your social media reach is hilarious. It's a fickle algo beast that changes every day. Let's start focusing on long-term growth, okay? That's what I care about and care about in other
Mhm.
artists." And so, my question to you, like, based off of this is, where do you see the music industry going, when it comes to the relationship with social media reach?
Mm, mm, mm. Wow. It's tough because on one hand, being a musician who started before the application of, the social media reach and needing to have followers, etcetera, it's tough because I don't think of that right away as something that's important, and yet it's become the thing. So it's part of the crazy change that we're kind of living through. I don't know that either you or I will see the resolution of how this gets sorted out. Feels like every day, whether it's music, movies, TV, our entertainment access and production is just changing the way that we get it, the way it is distributed, the way that we get a fan base. Even like I just said with Vulfpeck, filling an arena without really being on quote unquote the radio or without having a particular product or without being in a movie. You just have these followers that you gain online. And it's super powerful and it creates your own niche, but it also prevents, really establishing the megastars, the ones that we currently have, your Beyonce, Taylor Swift, etcetera. They all started in the old record label system. So even to say, "Oh, but we have those today," it's like, well, no, they didn't just start just via social media. So it's gonna be interesting to see how that evolves.
Yeah, eh, there's a couple of things that are floating in my head regarding our relationship to social media. One of them is that the music industry is very similar to the publishing industry in that they are looking for existing social media reach when they evaluate you to whether like signing you or getting you involved in some kind of festival, right? The part of your package, how do you promote your book? How do you promote, the thing that you're writing? And at the same time, I think that there is something, very subtle about reach versus followers versus the strategy that you use for marketing. Because, thinking it back to when we first started, we were talking about mailing lists, we were talking about touring, there is the various circuits that you could ride to get more, like, collegiate exposure, for instance. I think nowadays with the more democratized reach, it's a lot more complicated. But I think that there is something to be said about, how people are influenced nowadays. And, earlier today I was thinking about how I was influenced to buy my most recent set of albums that did not come from you. I will say to everyone who's listening right now, Trist recommends like 75-80% of my music. But this particular set of albums that I bought was because of a conversation that I had with a mutual friend of ours on social media. So he had posted photos of a concert of a band that I had seen in concert in my city 3 weeks before. So I reached out to this friend and we were talking about it. And one thing came up. He said, "Hey, did your city have an opener?" And I said, "No, we didn't have an opener, which is the band playing straight through." And he said, "Oh, ours had an opener, maybe because it was like the closing show in the tour, but she was amazing." And he sent me her Instagram, handles. So I followed her and, over the course of the next few weeks, I just kept on clicking through her reels, like checking to see her video content, listening to her, like the little snippets of music that she had posted, and realized I really liked her sound. I really liked what she was doing. So the next time I was, interested in buying an album or 3 in this case, I bought a bunch of her EPs, and I've really enjoyed listening to them. And so there was this thing where her social media didn't reach me, but she had made a fan through playing this live show, and he had told me, so it was like word of mouth, which is definitely the strongest way to sell music, right? But it was me evaluating her music through what I saw on her social media account. So it wasn't her reach. It was the fact that she was creating great content that got me really hooked on her music and influenced me to actually buy her album. So I
Yeah.
just thought that was interesting and thinking about like how marketing works nowadays and how it's not necessarily like how big your reach is. Do you have 1,000,000 followers? Do you have 2,000,000 followers? But it's more about like what is it that you're creating and who's talking about you and who's going to listen to your music and be interested in buying.
Yeah, and I think it always is gonna come back to the ability to do it live, to influence and impress somebody live and in person, and the word of mouth from that. So that part hasn't gone away, and I don't think that it ever will.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be really complicated, our relationship with social media and specifically the music industry's relationship with social media. So, more to come on this, but, thanks for the discussion. It was really interesting.
Thank you.
All right, and that's it for this week of the Musician's Loop. We hope that you share with your friends. If you have a question for our mailbag, please email us at the Musician's Loop. That's LOUPE at gmail.com. All right, we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Wait, was that it? Did we just finish?
We did. We did. All right.
Do I sound too lispy?
No, I think you're right. You're gonna be way more self-conscious of it.
I think so too. Yeah. All right.
Sorry. Okay.
Now I gotta say that again.
It's like comparing.
I can say the word 2,000,000. Yeah. Okay. Navigate strong. Okay.